Okay.
All right, everyone. Very welcome to this Swedish Team Coaches Association's seminar with David Clutterbuck. Before we kick off with David, Peter, I'd love if you could just mention a few words about the association as such.
Oh, yes. Great to see so many people joining us today. The Swedish Association of Team Coaches has been working now for
Jättebra att testa på det liksom. När jag inte börjar lagt upp då kan jag lägga upp en massa lappar här så du bara tar vilken du vill. Och sen så se hur du...
Great. And the association sprung out of a need for developing the team coaching in Sweden. We think it's a very important for the systemic team coaching can do a lot of good in the society and in the for companies and organizations in Sweden. And our aim is to support and to develop team coaching in Sweden. And we are one of two national associations. There's also one in Japan, but we're proud of being a Swedish association. And you're very welcome to join us if you're not already a member. And you'll find more information about us at our homepage or at our LinkedIn page. That's enough about the organization, I think. And after this meeting, we will have a sum up and discussion in Swedish. But Andy will tell you more about that. So I'll just thank you for joining.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm Andy, also one of the co-founders. And the format here is that we will have a presentation or a discussion with David for 45 minutes, followed up with a Q&A session. And after that one, we'll have a reflective space, as Peter said, in Swedish afterwards for you who want to hang around and do some of the discussions and reflections in Swedish, creating a discussion space there. But enough from us. We have David Clutterbuck with us from the UK. David is one of the original voices for team coaching and has been a part of shaping the space and the competence, the skill of team coaching and making it a profession. He was also one of the founders of the EMCC, European Mentoring and Coaching. What is it? College? No?
Council. Yeah.
Council. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, no only called it EMCC Global now.
EMCC Global now. Right. He's one of my favorites, being fun to listen to. His books are easy reads, and he's got a great model for team coaching, which I'm pretty sure he will be mentioning here. It's called Peril, and he'll explain it. So without further ado, let me introduce one of my heroes, David Clutterbuck.
Thank you very much. Often I say that the original pioneers of coaching, everybody else is either dead, deaf, or demented, and it's not entirely true. But I have been around for an awful long time, and in that time, we've seen an amazing development in terms of coaching, in terms of mentoring, and then the evolution of team coaching, and what we think of as team coaching now really is a phenomenon of the last 20 years. There was a lot of facilitation going on, a lot of team building, neither of which is quite the same thing. So a facilitator brings a process and helps the team deal with a specific issue, and then they go away. A team builder turns up and helps the team to value each other more and to build camaraderie, and goes away. But a team coach is there to help the team develop the capability internally to coach itself. And that's, I think, a radical difference. And I'm not sure at what point in my career I shifted from being a facilitator to being a team coach. It didn't happen all in one go. But I think that the process was increasingly one of realizing that actually the team could do a lot more without me directing them what they had to do. And that my role as a team coach was to help them achieve clarity. And then that key question in team coaching is, what do you together want to do about that? And everything comes down to that question. So I think the most wonderful time in team coaching is when you've worked with a team for a period, and they've role modeled on you, on the things that you've done. They've learned some processes and ways of thinking from you. They've started to understand their systems, both internal and external. And you see that they're into a discussion, and they've absorbed very different group norms. And they forget that you're there because they're doing the coaching themselves. And you stand up and you lean on the back of your chair and nobody notices. And you go and stand up by the wall and nobody notices. You go and stand by the door and nobody is interrupted from their deep conversation. You step outside the door and they still don't notice you. And after a while, they do notice you're not there. And you come in and you say, do you need me anymore? If you're familiar with the children's movie Nanny McPhee, yeah, when you need me but don't want me, I'll be there. When you want me but don't need me, I'll be gone. And this is a wonderful point in being a team coach. For me, team coaching is rooted deeply in complexity. We have a word we invented in the early 1990s. It's called simplexity. It means the art of making complex things simple, but not simplistic. So it's being able to see the complexity of the systems and then make decisions about how better to manage them. So a good question is, why has team coaching suddenly become so important and spread so much? Why have the professional organizations, all three of the main professional organizations in coaching, decided that they should have competencies or standards in this area, and an accreditation in this area? And the reasons are several that I believe. One of the key reasons is what's happening inside companies. We did a survey a couple of years ago, and we asked HR directors and chief executives in a number of countries, do you think we should be focusing more on recognition, reward, and development of individuals, or on the reward, recognition, and development of teams? Over 80% said we've got to shift more towards teams. And from the coach's point of view, we have this phenomenon that a large proportion of the coaching that's done today is better done by a machine already. I just experimented with this new AI chat, not ChatGPT, but chat something, and asked it a bunch of questions. It was mostly right. It was scary. And this with the structured replies, we've got an artificial intelligence in Southern California, which for some years now has been doing trauma counseling for soldiers returning from combat, slightly more than half of the people preferred the robot to a human because they felt it was less judgmental. Pretty much everything that a coach who's at the beginning levels of coach maturity, and I won't go into depth on the 4 levels of coach maturity, but if you're using, say, the GROW model, and that's all that you have, then a computer, an AI can do that better than you can, more consistently, have a bigger portfolio of questions to ask, all the rest of it. So anything that's repeat, that's mechanical and repeatable is under threat, which means that as coaches, everybody has to raise their game. They have to move to much more towards a more mature kind of coaching. And that has two components, two critical components. One of which is the ability to use yourself more. And the other is the ability to see systems. And what we've learned from hundreds of team coaches we've interviewed now, every single experienced team coach that we've spoken to, without exception, has said that their one-to-one coaching has significantly improved as a result of being a team coach, because they are better able to see the client in their systems. And it's interesting when we actually call them up the fourth level of maturity of coaches, systemic eclectic, because it has a very wide toolkit, but they don't use it very much. It's there in the background, and they see and it's very systemic. They see the client in their systems. They hold the client, or the client has the conversation they need to have with themselves. And that skill is something that takes a lot of developing. But as a team coach, we hold the team and support the team, while the team has the conversations it needs to have with itself. By the way, please do interrupt me with questions or comments or anything as we go along. This is a conversation, more than a lecture, I hope. So here we have another factor for coaches, which is how we add value.
David, can I interrupt for a second? And if anyone out there wants to ask David a question and don't feel comfortable doing that in English, please write in the chat and we will channel that question to David as we go.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, just trying to remember where I was now. I've completely forgotten where I was.
Yeah, I interrupted you. You were talking about the individual coaches being by seeing the client in the system.
Lovely, thank you. Yes.
So, and how do we add value? You said.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. Yes. So, if you think about when we're working with an executive in an organization, we can help change that person's. We can help improve their performance in some way or another, or some ways. And let's say that has a value of X. If we can help that leader develop a coaching culture in their team, and to get more, build the capacity and capability and performance of their team, then that's probably 5X. If we can then, at the next stage, work with the team leader and the team as team coaches to help them build their performance, their capability, and their capacity to do more, that probably doubles that again. So we're talking 10X. And then we can go beyond that. If we can actually work with a team of teams, we're multiplying it by whatever figure you want to make up, but it's a much bigger figure. It's just in the same way as you can have a team full of individual high performers, but the performance of the whole team is poor. You can have a function or a structure within an organization, or a whole organization full of high performing teams, yet the performance of the whole structure is poor. So what we're seeing is this expanding role of coaches more and more into the systems. And so it's not just enough to be systemically aware, it's actually having the skills to enable the system to see itself. And one of the things that I find most common is that teams are blissfully unaware of their potential to influence the system. So many times we come in and the issues that the team face are largely externally generated or amplified by external factors. And the team then develops a victim mentality. So it's all done to us. But if you help them if they can map the system and see the pressure points within the system, they can help to bring the system together. Let me give you an example. We have a number of crises in the English health system, to put it mildly. But one little bright spot was that what's happening is that the accident and emergency system departments are clogged up with patients, largely because they cannot put people into beds in the hospitals, and they can't put people into beds in the hospitals because the social services are unable to take them and put them and care for them in the community. And that means that there are queues of ambulances waiting outside the accident and emergency to offload people into the hospital. It's a chaos. And one of the accident and emergency departments here said, well, okay, well, look, let's look at the system as a whole. And so it brought together all the people in the system and said, how can we together ease this whole process? And they found that they could, by taking over a local hotel, they could actually help to ease it. So they looked at lots of solutions within the system as a whole to alleviate both their problem and the problem of the system. Increasingly, we're seeing this as a key role of team coaches, helping the team see itself in its systems and its power to change the system as a whole. This is highly satisfying, to say the least. So we, over the last nearly 20 years, we've been researching what good practice looks like in team coaching, and how we grow team coaches most effectively. We've just in the last year we did a study of team coach supervision. So what are the extra skills required of a supervisor to work with team coaches?
David, could I ask you to, for the benefit of all of us, explain a little bit of what you mean when you say team coach supervision?
Yeah. Okay. So most of the professional bodies require supervision for coaches, or professional coaches. ICF recommends it, and for the ICF team coach qualification they've announced last year, it also requires supervision of a coach. So what we mean by supervision is not the coach mentor, because that's not a professional qualification. A supervisor is a highly trained person who is typically a very experienced coach as well, who has a very strong grounding in psychology, but isn't necessarily a psychologist or social sciences, but is able to support the coach in the what's called normative, formative, and restorative. So normative, helping making sure that what they're doing is safe, and helping them to align what they're doing with an evidence base. Formative, which is educational, so new tools, new techniques, helping them to understand themselves and the way they interact with the client systems. Because the moment that you step into a team coaching assignment, you are part of that client's systems. And then restorative, it's about keeping sane and healthy. So those three areas are broadly encompassed by supervision. Carol Whittaker, Michelle Lucas, and I did a book 2 or 3 years ago on basically how to be supervised. We didn't cover it as we did it primarily from a one-to-one coaching basis, but I think thinking about how you're supervised is very helpful for a coach, particularly if you link that with your coach development plan.
Right. I can agree that Peter and I personally have used supervision as a personal training tool and to keep the tool sharp and in good shape myself as the tool when I coach. So I can really recommend to everyone doing supervision. It is really great.
It certainly just opens up your eyes to a lot of things that you may be missing, and there's one-to-one supervision, which has the advantage you get the total attention of the supervisor, but you don't get the benefit of group supervision, where other people bring cases and issues, and you realize, oh, that's me, I've got that one, I haven't thought about that. So there's a sort of laser focus from one-to-one coaching, and there's a broad focus from group supervision. There's also in between pairs supervision. So it's pretty much everybody in the field now is with working from an evidence base, is recommending that team coaching is normally done with 2 team coaches. There are multiple reasons for that, but one of them is that it's very difficult to be aware of everything that's going on in the room and to manage the conversation, or facilitate the conversation rather. And you can swap back forward, and you can give each other feedback. So it's a really good, strong learning relationship between the two of you.
Right. David, we have another question.
Yeah.
A question from Rachel. Intervision, would that be group supervision?
Yes, that's a sort of French version of supervision, and it's very similar. It has some minor differences, but essentially it is the same. It doesn't necessarily in intervision involve having an accredited supervisor. So that's the one key difference. But most of the time, the people doing it are very experienced supervisors. Thank you. So we've got these 3 kinds of supervision: individual, group, and pairs, and it just helps to keep you focused. And a lot of the kind of things that we get, when, for example, somebody brought me into supervision a little while ago. The fact that they brought in somebody as a team coach partner, but found that person has come in with a whole bunch of their own ideas about how the relationship with the client should be managed, which weren't really team coaching, which was much more about process management, so facilitation, if you like. And how do they help to educate their co-coach? These are the kind of things that come up all the time. So essentially, we have to recognize that as a team coaching pair, we are also a team. And the teams that we're working with will be observing what we do from a perspective of role modeling. So we have to be aware of our role as role models in this whole process. And sometimes, sometimes just having a discussion, the 2 team coaches, about their own concerns and how and doubts about what's the best way forward can really help the group to see that it's okay to build that psychological safety that's fundamental to having a high performing team. So I've done a number of research projects trying to understand what makes a high performing team. And of course, there's a whole literature going back all the way to John Hackman in the 1990s, looking at what makes team coaching or what makes teams effective. There are multiple factors, but intriguingly, they are, some of them are internally based, some of them are externally based. And Hackman has this balance. There's also a lot of stuff out there which is unevidenced. I think confusing and actually sometimes quite damaging. So
I can recognize that we see when we encounter talking to customers, a confusion around what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And what is research based and what isn't. Do you have any good ideas how we can help? Because that is one of the aims with the Swedish Team Coaches Association, is to raise the awareness of what is actually research based. How can we raise the awareness of what works and what is based in science rather than just thinking?
So I can give you the key names are Hackman, Katzenberg, Wageman, Wageman, Shampoo, Mr. Shampoo, Champous. There's Hawkins and my own studies. Those are the primary research-based or evidence-based bodies of knowledge that we have. There are a few others, but those are the primary ones that we see.
Great, thank you.
Things that are not evidence-based but are frequently quoted. Well, one would be the forming, storming, norming to performing. If I tell you that model was created of a study of people in therapy groups all suffering from depression or similar diseases, you might get a sense of wondering, oh, what's the relevance of this to teams? And the answer is one study from the States shows that only 2% of teams actually go through this process. Wow. The critical factor is the storming. You don't have to do the storming. And in fact, with good team coaching, you just breeze straight through that.
So do I understand you correctly that what you're saying is that you don't have to dive into the storming valley, but you can go straight from basically starting into norming and up to performing?
Absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of people in Sweden are talking about a researcher called Susan Whelan.
Yeah, I don't know her work very well.
Right.
So that would be an interesting one. I should her integrated model of group development. Yeah, remember, a group is not a team.
Right.
And also remember that most of the teams we're working with are not in formation; they are already established. So this I will actually refresh myself on her model.
And we have a question from Åse Thorsén here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I prefer team coaching, but I have a lot of colleagues that are working with Susan Whelan's model, and it's called group development because it starts as a group and ends as a team. I just wanted to add that. So it's relevant in their perspective on teams, for teams.
And I think anything that is properly research-based is really valuable to use. And what we're finding is if you are aware of multiple models, it gives you much more flexibility. When I was doing my first studies for the first evidence-based book on team coaching back in 15 years ago, we looked at what people were offering, or what they said was team coaching, and we still see people offering the same things now. So you've got six sessions. Each session starts with a particular diagnostic and a particular. This is not team coaching. It's nothing to do with coaching. It's a highly directive focus. So there's a lot of stuff out there that says it's team coaching, but is not. But I must refresh myself on Susan's work. But yeah, I think anything which draws on the evidence base and develops the evidence base of how groups and teams function is going to be informative and useful. The other big model or framework that turns out to be nonsense is that's not unfair. Let me rephrase that. That turns out to be less well-founded than you might than it's proclaimed to be. Is Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. The book, it says it's a fable, and it is. Each of the elements individually can be found in the literature, but the connection between them and the hierarchy is not supported by empirically at all. In fact, you can find lots of examples of things operating almost randomly between those factors. The model also has a really big problem that it misses out half of the most important factors that affect a team. In particular, the influence of external factors, stakeholders. Now, the assumption that everything that goes wrong with a team is internally generated is manifestly untrue. So it's not that these things aren't useful; they can form some useful discussions, but we have to be. I think as team coaches, it's really important for us to be really critical of any theory and say, where is the evidence for it? So, as Sandra said earlier, I've spent the last 10 years plus looking at teams from a complex adaptive systems perspective. And the reason for that is that teams are complex adaptive systems nested in other complex adaptive systems. And so understanding and getting clarity around the nature of those systems gives us many more ways in which we can support the team and bring change about, or help them bring change about. So what we did was a vast literature search of trying to identify as many as possible factors that were either claimed or evidenced to influence the performance of teams. We found over 140 of them. We boiled these down to just over 20, and then we boiled them down again to 6 clusters of factors which we could see were interacting. We also had the privilege of being one of the board's biggest high technology companies, gave us the opportunity to do focus groups in their highest performing companies around the world. And that gave us so much data. And basically the 6 items or factors that we discovered interact with each other in multiple ways to produce either high performance or low performance at the extremes, or just mediocre performance in the middle. And it's understanding those interactions between things, between factors, that enables us and the team to really understand its own dynamics. So if I walk through them one by one, the first thing that we see is that the purpose of the team. Do people know why they're there? Is it meaningful for them? So it's purpose and motivation. That the sense that we have a reason for being here. And one of the questions I sometimes ask teams is, who actually cares if you succeed? Sometimes we actually sometimes have tears when people respond to that. So, having a purpose is one thing, but if it doesn't motivate you, and if it's not all the same purpose, and that's one of the big distinctions between a group and a team. Everybody in a group can have a similar purpose for a similar purpose and not the same purpose. So there's a difference between common purpose, which everybody has their own, and shared purpose, where there is an interdependency, and it's something you are all committed to making the same thing happen, typically for an external cause. So purpose and motivation, fundamental starting point. Then we've got the external processes and systems. How do we listen to our stakeholders? What's the kind of relationship that we have with them? Do they champion us? And external stakeholders can be external within the organization, can be customers, can be anybody. And we distinguish between stakeholders, who are people who are affected by what you do, and influencers are people who may or may not be stakeholders, but influence what you can do. So the budget holders, for example. We've recently also come up with a lovely term, the misstakeholder. The people who are affected by the errors that you make. And I'm going to do a blog on that sometime soon. So it's a matter of how we build relationships that actually enable us to fulfill the purpose better with those stakeholders and influencers.
Great. I love the mistake holders to sort of put that humanity into the system as well.
Exactly. It's such a nice little word. It's
It is. David, it's been really interesting listening to you, but I get curious, when you've been out working with teams as a team coach, is there anything that you've encountered that you would say is a great learning mistake that you've had with a team that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, well, I can tell you that the biggest mistake that I and so many other people have made is that you don't do enough homework. You go into the team with a briefing from HR or somewhere else and think you understand that team. And then you find that it's nothing like that. And everything you've planned goes out of the window.
So how would you recommend that team coaches approach their assignments if the briefing you had from HR is not enough?
Well, what we've learned is that it's absolutely essential to have a discovery process. To get in there, to talk with people, understand their perceptions of the team and the role of the team and their role within that team. Basically to get a sense of the internal and external dynamics. And this is where the Peril model, can be helpful as a diagnostic in itself, or simply as a framework for asking the right kind of questions that get to all the dynamics of the team.
So basically an interview with all the members of the team before you start the process?
Yep. And sometimes with some of their key stakeholders as well. Yeah. How do they see the team?
There are a lot of measurement tools out there. Would you like to comment on the kind of tools that are out there? You've got everything from combined disk measurements to systemic tools.
The big question is, what level of systemic complexity do they address? So, and that's one of the reasons why we spent so much time developing the processes that we have. If you think of the difference between linear or simple systems, systemic and complex adaptive systemic. I like to use the example of conflict. You've got some conflict in the team. So a linear or simple or simplistic approach would simply say, okay, we'll go and bang some heads together. A systemic approach would say, well, actually, no, the issue is not necessarily inside the two people; it's in the space between them. A complex adaptive systemic approach would say, okay, the issue is within the system, and the interaction between elements of that system. So, for example, each of the two protagonists might have loyalties to different other departments in the same company, which are driving the conflict. So the more you've got to start opening up. Most of the tools out there are either simple or basic systemic. To the best of my knowledge, there is nothing else out there that is a complex adaptive, that takes a complex adaptive systemic approach.
David, you were explaining the 6 factors that was
Yeah.
important. You came 1 and 2. Let's see, what's 3, 4, 5, and 6?
So number 3 is R for relationships. Really, we're talking here about psychological safety, the degree to which people can speak up and feel open. When we do diagnostics on this, it's quite fascinating. Frequently, we find the team leader and maybe 1 or 2 people close to them think there's a high level of psychological safety in the team. And then some other people in the team, particularly if they're more junior or if they come from a different cultural background, think there's very low psychological safety in the team. You know, and the questions we ask are simple things like, how many times in the past month have you felt that something needed to be said but didn't dare to say it? And then we've got the I, which is the internal processes and systems. So when we are exploring those, we're looking at how do people make decisions. Most teams actually don't have robust systems of decision making. One of the first things that we help them to create as team coaches. How do they communicate with each other? Do they over communicate or under communicate? What's the process? The quality processes too. So there's a whole bunch of internal processes, how they organize the work and the communications around it. Then the first of 2 L's. And the first one is learning. So the critical question here is, how is the team adapting to the needs of the world around it? How do they know? Are they ahead of the curve, behind the curve, or just riding the curve? And here we help as team coaches to get them to create a team development plan, to integrate all the learning that happens in the team, but become more conscious of the need to make learning a key activity. So most of the teams that I work with end up with agendas for their normal team meetings that have task-based agendas and learning-based agendas. And then the second L is leadership. Now, when we talk about leadership, we don't mean that being the leader. We mean the exercise of leadership within the team by anybody. And there's a lot of literature now about distributed leadership, and the need for the leader of the team to give up delegate. I don't like the word delegate because it implies power, but for the distribution of the roles of leadership, and the accountability and responsibility for getting things done. And of course, Sweden and Norway have been pioneers for the last 50 years. As a young journalist back in the 1960s, I spent a lot of time writing about semi-autonomous work team experiments from Norway and Sweden, and so this is very much culturally built in. It's not necessarily the same in many other countries. And in a piece of research that I did for the American organization, the Conference Board, last year, in the focus groups, HR directors from across Europe were telling us that a high proportion, in some cases more than half, although we were not allowed to quote those statistics, of their top 200 or 300 executives were basically obsolete because they couldn't think in systemically, and they couldn't let go of command and control. They wanted to go back to pre-COVID times. And indeed, a high proportion of team coaching assignments start with the team leader needing to let go, so one-to-one coaching for them to do that, and then moving into helping them work with their team so their team can support them in letting go. Major focus of work. So leadership becomes a moderating factor between the other factors. And what I did was a major piece of desk research, trying to find any significant literature looking at what leaders actually do rather than the traits of leaders. There are 4 or 5 million books and articles on the qualities of leaders. There's almost nothing on what leaders actually do. And what we learned was there are only 2 basic things that leaders do that can't easily be delegated or shared with the rest of the team. One of them is get all the stuff that comes from above, getting permission from above, an authority. Somebody's got to sign off. The other is protecting the team from interference from outside that stops it doing its job. Everything else can be in part or whole distributed amongst the team. And so what we're able to do when we begin to understand the way that the team functions, we can help them to see the connections between each of these things. And so the diagnostic is which is a really powerful app that also actually helps you build up your business record so you can show the impact that you've had as a coach. It's really quite remarkable, the power of it. But we also use the approach to get the team together. Once we've done our discovery processes, we bring them together and they bring some examples of when things have gone really well and when things have not gone well. And then we analyze them. We say, okay, so what was happening in terms of the relationships with your external stakeholders? And maybe they were complaining about, customers were complaining about late deliveries or whatever. So how did that impact the process of your internal processes? Did you react fast enough to that? Did you actually talk, well, how did that impact your learning? Did you actually sit down and think about how can, what do we learn from this this experience? How does it affect the sense of your their understanding of the issues that you face, etc. So you can see the patterns of connectedness. Once you've done this with several positive and negative examples, you've now got a really clear picture of the patterns that are either driving the team towards high performance or taking it away. They can then use that data to say, okay, this is where we need to focus our attention. When in the example I gave of conflict before, whenever somebody says, can you come in and help us with conflict in this team? We know that's a symptom. It's not the cause. The cause is an interaction of multiple factors in the team system. And that's what makes it so much more fun, apart from anything else. It requires us to have to be able to step back and help the team see its internal systems and external systems, and to work with those systems. There's a whole set of tools we have, for example, which use the analogy of back pain. Might be meaningful for some of you, but somebody has sciatica, for example, they can't move their leg. It's because of there's a trapped nerve in their spine. The source of pain in a system is not necessarily where the pain is felt. And actually helping the team to identify the sources of pain and the paths of pain in the system, give them all sorts of tools and options to be able to change things. And we're not coming in as consultants telling them how to do it. We're coming in to help them get that clarity so they can determine how they're going to do it. And I do see we have a hand up there from Po. Hi, Po.
Hi, David. Long time no see. Yeah. You're talking about tools, and very early on you were talking about if you only have the grow model, AI will beat you.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much more behind that statement, because what you're saying then, if we don't have knowledge of, for example, leadership theory or and so forth, then we won't even know what questions to ask, and we can't actually understand the leader we're coaching. So there's something there that I mean, there's a lot of myths in coaching. You know, if you learn coaching, you can coach anybody, and a lot of people learn that they will be thrown out of a management team meeting because they don't even get the language in the room.
Yes.
There's something there that, you know, now are also giving us a lot of a structure around for team coaching, and I find that really really interesting. And maybe you could go a little bit deeper into what you really mean about the knowledge needed to actually use a simple tool as Grow in a better way.
Okay.
And in the application of team coaching.
Okay. So shall I put this in the context of the education of team coaches? And then we can dig deeper if you wish. The EMCC has the most highly developed approach and scientific approach to the development of team coaches. The ICF approach, and this is not a criticism, this is just they have a very different way of looking at things, is basically to get people to be supervised to do a number of other things, and it's about we've got to demonstrate 60 hours of development, a lot of supervision and work and reflections on 5 teams, and that's an approach. EMCC requires a much longer journey, which at the senior practitioner level requires 500 hours of work, of learning, of practice, of reflection, supervision, etc. So it's quite a journey under the EMCC approach, and the foundation level effectively sharpens up your ability to work with the individual team leader and help them to build the coaching culture in their team, and gives you enough confidence to go away and play with some teams, and start to get some experience and to make the mistakes. This is, if you're not screwing it up every time every time you do a team coaching assignment, you're not learning. It's you're probably doing something else. We expect to get it wrong. I don't think there's a single team coaching assignment that I've had where I haven't had to step back, reflect, recontract with the client, and learn from the experience. So we are in the business of managing or being comfortable with uncertainty and experiment, and much more experimentation than we would normally do. The practitioner level equips you just to give you a whole bigger toolkit, and it enables you step by step to look at each of those stages, from discovery to the initial sessions that you have with the contracting with the team and the team leader, and contracting between the 2 team coaches, all the way through to holding the team coaching sessions, observing team meetings and giving feedback, or helping the team to understand the dynamics of its own team meetings, all the way through to reviewing the process and then evaluating what has changed at the end. And then the senior practitioner basically just builds on that to give you the confidence to be able to walk into any kind of team anywhere, pretty much, and know that you are going to be able to help them to determine how they're going to grow with your support, but not doing a process to them. It's actually helping them to find their way. So it's a bigger and bigger, you get a bigger and bigger toolkit all the way through. So that's the process, and it's it's a learning journey that enables you to have real confidence that you don't have to know all the answers, that you are able to be naive about a team but in order to enable them to be naive about themselves.
Thank you. I would like to pitch in here and thank you a lot, because we've had a lot of knowledge from you, which we appreciate a lot. And I would encourage you, the rest of you, to think about questions. But before we go there, I'd like to tag on to what you just said about the different ways of getting accredited with the MCC and the education. In Sweden, ICF is pretty dominating, but I know, because you've asked Peter and me to be assistants in your Nordic and Baltic training according to the MCC model. Would you like to just give us a few words about that here?
Sure. Yes. So what we have, my company, Coaching and Mentoring International, has colleagues all around the world who are all very experienced coaches, mentors, and in most cases experienced team coaches as well. They and all of them involved in training. So we felt it was really it would be really beneficial to focus a program specifically on Scandinavia, for a number of reasons. The similarities and differences in the cultures, but there are a number of cultural assumptions which are really helpful for coaching, which are shared across the states, and also in the Baltic states as well. So it seemed to have to be able to do something that was focused in the region and residential. Pretty much everything else on offer is now virtual. Most of the programs the international programs, the multinational programs are virtual, and while that's great. What the feedback that I get from so many coaches is actually what we really value is being able to practice this stuff with other coaches to build that community of team coaches. And that's why it's great that you've got the Swedish Association, because that is a ready-made community. So it's adding value to that community. And we've done similar things in the UK. We've had face-to-face programs with the MCC UK, and also in Ireland now we're doing them shortly. So I think there's some real value coming together and being able to practice team coaching live in a room with a real case study. We can do it to some extent in virtual practicums, but it's so much more powerful. I mean, just to give you an example, something that happens quite frequently. We're working through, we're doing a role play, and two team coaches are together, working with the voluntary people role playing the client, and then one of the coaches jumps up and takes charge of the flip chart. And we're always able to stop it at that point and say, now, have you just moved to being a facilitator? Who's in control of the process here right now? And it's just simple things like that you get out of coming together that makes it such a deeper learning experience.
Great, thank you. David, we've had one question earlier on that I wasn't able to fit in there, and it was about the learning, and you mentioned a learning-based agenda. Could you give us a quick description or picture of what a learning-based agenda would look like?
Okay, it's basically what have we learned, and what do we need to learn over the next and it's just that simple question.
All right.
And we plan task achievement, but what can we plan learning? If we don't plan it, it gets pushed aside. And there's a technique some of you are probably aware of called cock up of the month, which is where you can have a prize for the best mistake that was made, not for the mistake, but for the learning that's been taken from that mistake.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. I know that Jenny had a question as well.
Yes, hello, David. My name is Jenny. I work as an MCC, and I had this ICF team coaching advanced certification now with Andy and some other coaches in Sweden. So, and I also an NLP trainer, and I worked a lot with Ken Wilber as well. And I was curious about what you think of his approach to his theory of everything. You know, his theory of the 4 quadrants, as you understand.
I think it's done a lot of it's added a lot of value. It's a simple tool that people can use to understand things.
Mm-hmm.
And as a starting point for thinking about the team's issues, it can be very valuable. It is, however, a linear, a simple model. So so one needs to go beyond that in order to get the team to understand things more deeply. There's nothing wrong with starting with a simple model. But if you're familiar with Kuhnefen, it's come as something developed by Dave Snowden, a lovely model that looks at things which are linear, complicated, complex, or chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And really, Ken's work really focuses in the first two, in the simple or linear and complicated. Doesn't have the depth to be able to go into the other two.
Yeah. Okay. So, and one more, just a quick question: the spiral dynamics. Do you use something of that in your work?
You could bring any of those things in, but you have to remember that they are good ways of thinking about things, but they are not very well evidence-based. So that doesn't invalidate them.
Mm-hmm.
It means that we have to be careful. We have to be careful in knowing we're selecting them and why we're selecting that particular method to use.
Like different perspectives into the team and to develop teams' perception of different perspectives.
Exactly so, yeah. So I mean, and you know, I find it really helpful to give the team 2 or 3 different models around and say, you know, which works for you, which gives you a language that you feel most comfortable with.
Okay.
Yeah. What else?
Thank you, David. We are up on the hour and a minute or 2 past. I have one more question, and that is regarding AI. Is it okay with you, David, to take another 5 minutes?
Of course it is. Yeah.
Let's sign off.
Yeah.
Then we have a question from Andres. If machines, AI, already are better at doing some of the things we do, what value will be most important for us to bring to the customer in the future?
Oh, well, that's in some ways there are only 2 things that we bring. We bring humanity and we bring wisdom. I was reading an analysis of the threat from AI to so many jobs, because you know, in medicine, for example, you know, the machines can diagnose more accurately than doctors mostly, but do we actually want to sit down and have a conversation with a machine or with a human being? And increasingly, it's our humanity, so the self that we bring, that enables us to use all this technology, but for people to feel more comfortable with working with a human being. So I think that's one thing. And the wisdom, I define 3 kinds of wisdom. There's skinny wisdom, which is having all the knowledge in the world about a particular subject. There's broad wisdom, which is the wisdom you get from just being a person, and having your life experience. And there's meta wisdom, which is about being able to put together multiple different kinds of knowledge and wisdom to address a new situation. And the machine can do the first one. It really can't do the second two. And that's where we have the edge. But I believe strongly, and I've written a number of papers in the idea of the coach AI partnership. That if we see this as an assistant, something that can really help us to serve our clients better, then we're going to thrive. The danger is that we become subservient. That all the diagnosis and analysis and stuff that the machine does, they shape the conversation we have with the client, rather than we just use those to inform what we do.
Great, thank you, David. As a sign off here, thank you for taking more time than we had discussed. We really appreciate that. We have been mentioning the training that you will have here, and if I understood correctly from the discussions we've had beforehand here, you're also offering right now an early bird discount on that training. And for those of you who are interested, Peter and I will be able to talk a bit more about that training in the Swedish reflection room afterward here. And we can send it out as a part of, if you, because I don't have all the names and addresses of you who are here, those of you who are interested in knowing more and can't stay, if you please would send an email to either myself, Anders Troedsson at bestteam.se, or Peter Englén at sverigeteamcoacher.se. Then we will be happy to send out material on that. With that, David, thank you very, very much for taking us through a lot of interesting thoughts and ideas on team coaching. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to working more with you in the future. And you're always welcome back here to Sveriges Team Coacher to share and be around with us.
Thank you very much, Anders and Peter. Brilliant. Well, have a good rest of the conversation. Lovely to see you all. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Och här tänker jag stänga av inspelningen.